We are really pleased to have you here today, and we've got a good set of participants, and I think we're going to get rolling. We're just past noon on the hour, so we're going to get rolling with our event. We're going to do a two-part event today. The first part is an update and calibration and some suggestions about what to do about our US government shutdown. And we can have a quick dialogue and questions about that in the first part of the session. And then we're going to transition to the latter part of the session around how grant accounting wins more grants. We've got a really good lineup of content and setup for you there. So you're welcome to stay for the whole thing, of course, but we'll have a break point about 1/3 to halfway through to break these two key topics. If there are questions along the way, please feel free to put those into the chat and we'll answer them as we go or leave time at the end if they're a little more intricate. I want to start just by letting you know, if you're not familiar with Grant Engine, who we are and where we're coming from as a team and a company. We are based in New York City and in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. We're in our 10th year. And that first line that you see there of saving lives and extending the length of a quality life is really, that top line is really our bottom line. That's why we're in this business. And we're very serious about focusing on that as a mission in how we recruit and look for clients and work with clients to get product in market. We have over 75 people. Most of those individuals are PhDs, and we have a whole accounting team that you'll hear more about later. A number of things that are in the company that are very successful and edges or differentiators about how we work internally, and the team is the number one thing on that list, but those things really converge on a key win rate that is really the outcome for our clients, which is 2x to 4x higher than the national average. So that's what we're in the business of doing is getting you funding. So we're going to just touch on the update, what can be done about a very difficult environment, and then, as mentioned, turn into grant accounting and how it's impactful for your long run work, and then do a quick overview on Grant Engine. So I want to just start with a quick recap of where we are and put into where we ended the government year fiscal 2025 in September 30th, which is the government year end, as I'm sure most of you know. And this left-hand chart shows the 2024 by month total expenditures for small business grants from the NIH on a cumulative basis. And you can see that the amount of money that was spent starting in February, given the current administration, was much lower. And that continued through most of the year. And there was a lot of trepidation, a lot of fear, and that difference doesn't look small on the chart, but it felt quite significant. And that difference was impactful. I think it impacted many of our clients in terms of how it felt. It certainly impacted many of our clients in terms of prospective interest in the program. And in the year, we really predicted that things were going to shake out. There was a continuing, and to the positive, there was really a continuing resolution that matched 2025 funding to 2024. And that, by and large, played out. Where if you look at on the right-hand side, well, I say by and large, as in it exactly played out. If you look at the right-hand side, this is a positive number on the graph is the amount that 2025 by month cumulatively was lower in expenditures from 2024. And normally the month of September receives awards of about 34 to 35% of the total year. And that, and on September 12th, that number was still $71 million lower. And so that last 3 weeks of the year in the government side, a lot of expenditures went out the door. And indeed, 2025 was $10 million higher than 2024. It certainly did not feel like that was going to happen, but we predicted that that was the case after the continuing resolution got authorized on March 13th, and that played out end of day. And so that is good news. I think that speaks to the government allocating money to the small business program, and that's not a small thing. That's a big thing. The other thing I just want to share on this slide is that it's November 5th today. So we're at the very beginning of the government year end. And in the last 5 years, there's essentially no awards distributed in the first 2 months of the government year end. And really, for the first 2/3 of the year, there's activity for sure, but it doesn't really start until January 1st. And the first 7 months of the year, the first 2/3 of the year really disperses 1/3 of the money. So, and it's really a back half. This will become very relevant as we think about opportunities in the future, but that's a very relevant thing to think about is the government usually gets slow on the uptake, as we go. So that's how we ended 2025. And of course, on July 4th, there was the one big beautiful bill, as it was called in legal terms, was passed, and that called for a significant reduction in, and this, we're getting to the shutdown and 2026 in the outlook. There was a significant reduction in the big beautiful bill for NIH funding, NSF funding. NIH was down over 40%, NSF was down 50%. The CDMRP back in fiscal 2025 had been 57% reduction. And that's what was passed in the big beautiful bill. And the way, if you're not familiar, you probably are familiar, but just for the sake of good order, I'll mention the way money is actually allocated is that it gets passed by law by Congress and the White House. And then that law gets sent to appropriations committees to appropriate it at the agency and sub-agency level. And then it goes to the agencies and then they disperse it. And it's that 3-step process that is needed to actually receive funding. We are in that middle stage of, and well, we're in government shutdown, so not a lot is happening right now, but before the shutdown, we were in that stage of appropriations committees meeting. And what was very interesting about the appropriations committees, both significant, more vocal on the Democrat side than the Republican side, but some Republicans were also very vocal about support for the National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation. And also in the Senate and the House, in early August, they were very clear that what was proposed and passed into law was not okay with Congress. And the direct quote from multiple folks from Congress is that NIH, we've got your back. They want to see levels that are 1% higher than in 2024, which matched 2025 for the government year of 2026. And so this is probably not the reason why the government is shut down, but it is very relevant as it relates to support for the programs in the Appropriations Committee when the government does reopen. What we are anticipating is that regardless of, we're expecting things to get tougher. We're expecting pay lines, which is the basis upon approval, to get tougher. And I don't think that's a risky statement to say. I think that has a reasonable probability of happening. There is very deep support for that not to happen. But I think our approach internally as we think about supporting our clients and we recommend to clients is to think that it's going to get harder and act accordingly. And we'll talk about what to do during the shutdown here, but I think one of the key takeaways is that if you overweight how to overcome this more competitive environment, then you're ready when that more competitive environment arrives. That that means continuing to stay focused on the SBIR program. That means continuing to find additional sources to get funding, and continuing to submit high quality applications. And that is absolutely an effective strategy that we've seen for our clients in fiscal 25, where they got more awards than we've ever gotten. So here's a quick snapshot of the current shutdown. On the left-hand panel, you can see all 19 shutdowns on the left-hand side by date and term, or how long they lasted. The last one was 2019. That was the previous record of 34 days. We're now in the 36th day. And I, like many people and some pundits, it's not obvious that this is going to get buttoned up very quickly. I think we certainly saw the elections that happened yesterday as a moment in time where that would drive Congress and the White House to start having discussions. But I think we also see some these fundamental tectonic positions that different factions of our government are holding and not yet having a conversation to meet in the middle. There are definitely drivers on both sides where food SNAP benefits are running. Some have run out, others are getting ready to run out. Affordable Care Act premiums are now, some happened in October, but November 1st was really when that happened on a much more widespread basis. And there's this battle going on in our government between covering essential costs through ACA premiums, subsidies to support that for paying for healthcare, and then on the other side, reducing a large government. So, we want to follow the theme of what Doge was talking about. So we see. So Dan, if we can put the first poll to the audience, we see a red line. I want to do the poll and I'll tell my predictions of where I see inflection points happening, but I'm just curious as to what folks are thinking themselves. The wisdom of markets is a known thing. So we'll wait for a minute while that poll gets tallied. People submit their poll answers. So I think we see an event that's an inflection point of Thanksgiving. I think my wife was traveling yesterday on a plane, and she sat on the tarmac for 3 hours, and she's not the only one, right? Because of limiters on air traffic controllers, more people will travel for Thanksgiving, and if flights aren't happening because of ATC issues, that's going to be a loud thing. Families coming together, and Thanksgiving, I think, is a red line where we see things that becomes politically more dangerous for the audience. So yeah, we're right at response. So Dan, if you can publish those answers. So we see about a third of folks say it's going to happen before Thanksgiving. 42% think it's going to go after Thanksgiving, but before 12/31. And then we've got about 20% of the people think it's going to be after January 1st. And then 5% of the folks that responded think it's going to happen after Valentine's Day of 2026. So I think that is as I think about the calculus in our heads, not an not an unreasonable outlook if you handicapped the mix. And I think we need to be ready for this going on for some time. And we absolutely are from Grant Engine's side. So that's an insightful view. So here's where we are on a current status for the SBIR program itself, given the shutdown. July 4th, that big, beautiful bill passed, as mentioned. August, September, appropriations committees drew a line in their sand about supporting the NIH SBIR program. And as I think most folks know, on September 30th, or as of October 1, the SBIR program expired. It was up for renewal every 3 years. Last happened in 2022. So not only does the government need to reopen, but the SBIR program also needs to be renewed for the SBIR program to be submitting. There's some very good news around motivation and interest around that program that I'll touch on here in a moment. But I think overall, you can submit still for open solicitations. Help desks and phone calls are, some are closed, like SAM.gov and ERA Commons. Grants.gov is open, but during the shutdown, study sections to review the September submissions are on hold, and that will happen. Those will get rescheduled as the government reopens. What's interesting is that during this government shutdown, money is still flowing and certain events are still occurring as well. All of our clients, and we've got, obviously, through our GE accounting division, we've got good visibility into this, that all of our clients are getting all of their funds for, submitted invoices and interacting with the various payment management systems. That's true for National Science Foundation, for NIH, Department of Defense, ARPA-H. There are some delays. That has not been uncommon since DOGE jumped on the scene, but it's typically not excessive. So I'd say not longer than 2 weeks, typically. We've seen one that went, I think, 3 weeks, but it still got paid. So that's good news. And then certain government funding is still open. So ARPA-H has an active solicitation out called Thrive. They received solution summaries last Friday. There were open solicitations to the NIH, to the Department of Defense, and their broad agency announcements, Space Force, and others. Those are still available to be submitted. And some are not open. NSF had their open rolling deadline to submit. That was their last deadline to submit is today, the 5th of November. DARPA had a biotechnology office event that was scheduled for next Wednesday, and they are postponing that. NASA astronauts, this is a fun one for us. There's a lot of things that are not opening and are not open during the shutdown. NASA astronauts are working, they're doing simulations for a moon landing, but they're not allowed for public appearances. We've got an illustrious alum of Grant Engine who was on not only the U.S. national cycling team, but is also in the Artemis. She's an active astronaut in the NASA Artemis program, and she's not able to meet with us until the government reopens. So there's a lot of things not happening, but money is still flowing, which is extremely good news. So one thing that you can do, and we recommend you do during this time of furlough for many folks in the government, is to continue to be in touch with your program officer. And there are some reasons why you should hit send on an email during the shutdown. The first is that and this is if things are relevant or you need action or you'd like to re-engage on future opportunities. By sending an email now, you are in queue for the program officer in the government to respond. That creates a timestamp on communications that is relevant, because they can't respond, but you did everything you needed to do to be in touch with them. So that is a best practice we recommend. And we always recommend deepening the relationship with your program officer. They are very busy. Their world has gotten turned upside down, just like yours has, just like ours has over the last 9 months. And they're busy and they're stressed. And their job is to help you chart the course for your future project and company funding roadmap. So we really encourage engaging with the program officer to give them progress. That helps them win on their mandate of bringing product into market via the SBIR program, or if you're in the DoD, advancing that effort to the warfighter. You can engage with them to communicate to them your future roadmap and talk about what you're going to do in the next 24, 36, 48 months and how funding lines up with that. The seed office has funding through June of next year. And so that is a mechanism to get support for finding investors, getting support for paying to go to conferences, and other just general resources that the seed office has. If you have to do a budget reconciliation or change that's outside the standard reallocation limits, then obviously you need to get approval to do that on the program officer side. So those are some really key elements, and we've got a couple of questions that I'll just take now. So yeah, Willie, if you've reached out after October 1st, they're not allowed, unless they're essential personnel, they're not allowed to respond to you. They're technically not allowed to work because they're not getting paid, and no one wants to have that work without pay thing from an employer perspective. So if you've not had any success in reaching out to program officers, I would, if you sent an email and that covered all of what you wanted to address, and that's already been communicated, and that was a complete and actionable email with a call to action in it, and included all of the content you would like to communicate with a specific request and what you're asking of the program officer, you're good. You don't, I don't think you need to follow up. Yeah, because you've already done it. They will get back to you when they can. If after the government opens up, what I would recommend is sending another email as a forward to the one you sent before, just saying, hey, really glad to hear we're opened up. I just wanted to make sure this was on your radar, but that's extra credit. So I think that, I think you don't want to stack their inbox or go excessively, but I think that's, that could be a good way to go. So Igor's asking, is it a good time to initiate first contact with a program officer, or are they all too preoccupied with what's going on? So this is a great question, Igor, and it speaks to a mindset. It speaks to how I want you and the entire ecosystem that we work with at Grand Engine in the small business and many large businesses too. This is how I think we are all best served to think about this, is just because our Congress and the White House can't figure out how to keep our government open from our taxpayer dollars does not mean you should stop progressing your business and continuing to focus on how to go get federal funding, state funding, nonprofit funding. So the question is now a good time to initiate with a program officer? The answer is absolutely. The best time to initiate with a program officer was September 1st or September 10th or June 10th of 2025. Okay, that was the best time to do it. You should, it would have been a year ago. Unfortunately, we don't have a time machine. So the next best time to do it is right now. Now, the PO is not going to be able to respond to you because they're furloughed, and that is tragic. And we feel it. We have got friends who are program officers. We've got colleagues. We know these people. We're professional colleagues. Some of them are friends of ours. And to not get paid because the government can't figure itself out is tragic. It's brutal. And they want to do their job, right? So I think continuing to focus on your progress of your programs is in your control. and reaching out to a program officer about what you want to do is a very good idea. Recognize they can't get back to you. They're not allowed to respond until after the government reopens. But that doesn't change, that should not change what you do. So I think the answer is yes. So and that's true for that's perhaps most true for the January 5th deadline. And we'll talk about why that is later in the webinar. But I think the key point here is that you've got a lot of opportunity to go get funding. And you need to go after it. Many people are sitting on the sidelines, and that creates an opportunity for you, not a threat. Mimi's asking about year 2 awards. The government for the NIH, for the SBIR program, is they will not be allowed to issue new awards until such time as the government reopens and the SBIR program is renewed. Both of those things, the government's going to reopen at some point, right? It's like not going to happen. It's not that we can't have a government. At some point, the SBIR program has been around since 1982 for 43 years. It's never not been renewed. There's bipartisan support. We'll talk about why that showed up in Project 2025 and why that's useful. So I think it's going to happen, but you're not going to get a notice of award until the government reopens for year 2 money, Mimi. So I think planning accordingly. If you have already spent all that money, then that's one thing. If you've not spent that money, asking for a no-cost extension, if you haven't done that, that's a great mechanism to deliver a timestamp so that you can maybe stretch out the money you haven't spent between now and September 30th, or sorry, November 30th, which is when yours ends, to give yourself some runway and plan for the shutdown going longer than Thanksgiving, which is on the 27th of November. So I think that's one approach. And I think that's a great example of where time stamping, you're putting in a request for no cost extension, gives you a mechanism to do that. So that's one strategy that I'd recommend, Mimi, for your program, if you don't already have that, to stretch out the money you have that remains in year 1, if that exists. Eric's asking, what do you think is happening to phase 2 notices of awards that were supposed to be notified in November? Does the SBR Act? Yeah. So phase 2, maybe that's after a fast track, or maybe you've got a phase 2 renewal or a direct to phase 2 that the government signaled, Eric, that they were going to fund you, but they haven't yet shown up with a notice of award. So yes, those 2 things that I just mentioned do still have to happen to get a new notice of award issued, which is the government has to reopen and the SBR program has to get renewed. Those things are fully expected to happen, but those things are, we'll call those conditions precedent, which means they got to occur before.
Sam, thank you so much. Let me if I can just follow up quickly. So that means that budget was not appropriated before, because this was a successful phase 1. And then as a result, we had an invitation to phase 2. We applied in May. And the notice of award was supposed to be issued in August. And we were told that because there were a lot of people that preemptively left their jobs, and this is the head of AvWorks told us this, left their jobs when there was the Doge period. The reduction in force for issuing this contract was like 10-1. So they said, okay, we need an extension, and the extension was to notify us in November. And here we are now in November. Then there was a shutdown. So we thought, okay, maybe because it was supposed to be issued in August, maybe this is something that was appropriated before, or it also needs to approve needs approval of the SBR Act.
Yeah. So you're going to AvWorks.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think that has a different budget than the NIH. So it's my understanding that that money has been already appropriated. And
Okay.
the Defense Department is open. There, as you noted, they had some cuts. But that is one where I would get out in front, be in communication with your program officer representative, but also your contracting representative. And I would message them, go to different people. They are much shorter staffed than they were in August and than they were before and earlier in the year 25. So, but yeah, I would be vocal and get out in front of that 100%. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank
Yep.
you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay. So here, we're in a tough environment here, but there are rays of light. And Dan, if you can start the second poll now, as I go through this slide, the SBR program, whether it's AFWorks, DoD, NIH, NSF, what have you, is among the best returns on investment for any program, from food stamps to farm subsidies. It is an incredibly remunerative program for our government, for our society. And the US government recognizes that. It is actually called for in Project 2025 to have an increase of the allocation to the SBIR program. And no matter your political leanings, I think it's fair to say that the current administration has, by and large, followed a lot of what is in, almost all of what is in Project 2025. We fully expect the administration to follow this. If you want to look, it's on page 755. Concurrently, there is bipartisan support from Congress to increase the allocation. Today, that allocation is for the SBIR program under 4%. There's a bill circulating in the House that would increase it to 8%. So more than a doubling of that program. So that has bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate as well. So that's looking quite positive. Also in this bill, there is a call to turn that SBIR program into permanent law so that it doesn't require reauthorization every 3 or 4 or 2 years. It's been reauthorized a bunch of different ways over the last 43 years. So I think this has happened. This has a good chance of happening. But I think it happens most of the time because we ask for it to happen as citizens, taxpayers, and small business owners. So the question in the poll, if we can share the results, Dan, is, are you going to write your congressional representatives to communicate your authentic desire to have the government reopened? And this is a bit of a head scratcher for me, where most people were no, but I think everyone would agree that I think the government wants to be reopened. And I think maybe most of us would also agree the government has some room to trim its fat and get our national debt down. But not to turn it into a political conversation, I think functioning government is very useful for our way of life. And I think what functioning government means is different things to different people. But we need a government that's open. And part of this shutdown is, what does it mean for our government to function? And so I think my vote is, whatever your political views, whatever you think is important, be vocal about it, right? And that it plays out in elections, that plays out in a real world setting. And I can tell you, from being on Capitol Hill, one of my companies was named the best university spin out of the year, like 9 years ago. But I can tell you, and so we did a little round robin on Capitol Hill, and I can tell you, congressmen and women listen to their constituents. It doesn't maybe feel like they do, but someone will get back to you if you write to them. And the more vocal you are, the more vocal we are as a group, the more they will have to listen. And we made it really easy by, all these slides will be available to you. Just click on that link, democracy.io. You can put in your address, and it makes it easy to find out who your folks are. And if you want to write a message, we started one for you, but please write your own message. But that's a way for us to be vocal. And I can tell you this is how democracy works. It's certainly messy, but it doesn't work if we're not articulating a voice. So asking you to have a voice. So that's went a little bit longer with questions, but that's what we wanted to cover on the shutdown. I think there's some good news. It's certainly not great news in terms of the shutdown, but we're going to turn our attention to grant accounting and how to leverage grant accounting to get more funding. So we're going to shift to the latter part of the discussion. And really, we've got 5 strategic moves that we recommend you take, whether you do it yourself or you hire us at Grant Engine Accounting, to improve your chance of getting future funding. And then we've got a pro tip at the end as well. So number 1, be a reliable place that the government should give you money. That means being fiscally responsible. And the value of this is it lowers the perceived risk of the agency in giving you money. Agencies view past performance as the strongest predictor of future success. Your accounting track record becomes your reputation. And that is something that if you do things well on your accounting and your routines and controls, you will be delivered a positive reception from the funding agency. Number 2, there are rules that always must be followed in government funding. And those rules allow for some flexibility while staying compliant. And the reason why this, being aware of what you can do, where your flexibility is and where it is not, is that it allows you to it wins more grants because it allows you to be smart about your direct and your indirect cost classifications, about how much you can rebudget from one cost class to another when projects shift. And I think it's very clear that shift will always happen. And high-performing organizations have a cost structure that allows for maximum flexibility within the allowable rules. And that flexibility drives you be able to handle changes or changes that are happening between direct cost classes and between direct and indirect costs. You want to build indirect cost pools and allocating them that are in accordance with that federal guideline, but also match your actual operations. That is something that we have really a hallmark of GE accounting, where we're not going to force fit a chart of accounts and a structure that doesn't fit for your organization. We are going to make sure you're inside the lines, but having that flexibility of which cost pools are driving indirect cost, and also the definition of what is a direct versus an indirect, there is flexibility in those definitions. And there are things that are allowed, there are things that are not allowed in each of those areas. And the federal acquisition regulations dictate those things. And so you have to follow those rules, but there is room for flexibility. And that gives you flexibility on moving between cost classes for direct, and also defining a direct versus an indirect. This is particularly important when the government's threatening to reduce the overhead rate from a typical standard 40% to saying, hey, we're only going to allow 15%. That has not played out in the government flexing on that, but that doesn't mean that they won't in the future. And so having that awareness of what you can count if your indirect rate drops to 15%, what the definition is for direct costs and what's appropriate there, can be a very big unlock for continuing your operations as you need them to go for. And then you can always consider a negotiated indirect cost rate. So that's very useful and effective. So that's your pro move. That's your strategic move. Number 1 is maximize your flexibility within the rules. And if what I'm describing sounds very opaque or not clear, we're happy to have a conversation to unpack this and how to make it real. But I think the moral of this strategic move is there is flexibility. And if you have a partner, if you have it on your team, great. Or if you have a partner like Grand Engine Accounting to help you understand where you can drive flexibility, that opens up a lot of utility for how you work your grant or contract, and always being inside the lines and ethically tight and legally and fiscally responsible. Strategic move number 3 is make your accounting work for you. So one of the rules of business that I think I've learned, that our company, our really successful clients have learned, is that effective decision making happens when you have good visibility. So to allow for that optimum decision making, know where the money is being spent, how much is left, and how much is left by cost class reconciled against the aims of your grant, right? That calculus is necessary to know, are you tracking towards your goals, and do you have enough money to reach the finish line? If you had a grant that was well written by Grant Engine or by yourself, then there would be a clear amount of money allocation in the budget that builds a bridge to get to your milestone. If you did not do that, you built a pier, right? In the sense that you have to get to the other side of the river or the bay, and you've got a amount of money to get you halfway. That's not gonna, that doesn't get you to the other side of the river. That gets you all wet. And so there's a couple of views that can work. Is by cost class, look at your actual burn of cost expenditures versus what you expected. And then you can see by cost class where you're running, and is there some reallocation that you need to do in the budget. And then look at what are, in a tight environment, which it's always tight, doesn't just happen when there's a government shutdown or there's pressure. There's always a finite amount of resources. This environment we're in is no different than in 2022 when there was a finite amount of money. Yes, it probably felt better, but the reality is you still had a finite amount of money, and effective management happens when you look at your view number 2, fixed costs. What do I have to pay, and would be a layoff or a change in personnel that's key to the grant, versus variable costs. Certain vendors' costs can go up and down, certain consultants, materials cost can be stretched out. Have a view about what is essential for you in your core team that you're going to need tomorrow, that if you let them go, you're not going to have that easily back, versus a vendor that will be there on the other side if you have to downshift on spend. So that's another view to look at. And then on the second to last bullet, sharing this activity, obviously with the PI, they're the ones who are authorizing expenditures, and your project managers, having that socialization, even if it's someone in the lab, about giving them visibility about what they need to do to stretch a dollar, can be very, very important. And then that bottom line of, which was really where we started, is you need to build a bridge to reach your goals of the grant. That is very essential to use that money appropriately, and that's a mechanism to tying your financial outlook to your scientific aims and those milestones, to make sure you have that runway to make it, is pretty key. Strategic move number 4, build it once. Your accounting chart of accounts, your routines and controls for processes, your policies and procedures, your training mechanisms, your documentation activity for employee sign off on policies, timesheets. Build it once, and then you can scale it up. If you have a system for, I'll call it accounting and compliance engine, that works well, there's always going to be minor tweaks that you're going to want to do as you go. But if you build a system that is strong and reliable and works, if you have 10 grants, the same way as if you have 3 grants, then you've created an infrastructure that is actually quite powerful. And that um, that accounting and compliance platform or engine that you have built is will serve you in the future. And it's a foundation upon which you can walk to think about non-dilutive funding as a large and effective component of your total capital stack. I think, you know, we definitely see equity for our companies as a necessary component to reaching an exit or reaching breakaway velocity of getting a product on market, generating revenue and then profits. And we obviously see non-dilutive funding as a great place there, as an additional component of your total capital stack. And we recommend both equity and non-dilutive funding. And your non-dilutive funding has a lot of rules and requirements that you need to keep tabs on. And if you standardize that, you're in a much better place. And so building audit prep as you go, right? Not trying to scurry around when the audit gets announced is pretty key. And then realizing that as a business leader, whether you're the signing official or the president or the PI or a team leader, having communication to your broader team around what those rules are for how you can allocate funds, what's allowable, what's not, and making sure everyone's up to speed on the consistency and rigor of your system, well, it ensures that you're going to have success. Reference guides are a very good mechanism to make sure that people have a touch point that they can go to. But the opportunity here is to build a system and then continue to go after funding, and the accounting, whether it's us as your partner or on your own, that engine will continue to be there for you and reliable for you as you scale. And the ultimate expression of that is the audit, which happens after you've received $1 million or more in any one calendar year. So I think if you're doing anything right, you're definitely going to get an audit. Make those routine, right? That it's a good day, not a bad day. And then lastly, using the audit as an asset. You're always being audit ready allows you for that audit to be routine. And the benefit of this is that larger multi-year awards later won't overwhelm your system. And this audit I think about this like hygiene in your world. If you have a good audit report, that's something that equity investors are going to look at and say, that's a well-run organization. Audits can be a source of anxiety for most organizations, which stands to reason, right? The auditor is going to come in, they have some power, and that has some potentially negative effects. But if you have done your organization and done it well, it's actually a showcase of your operational excellence. And that is a feather in your cap, and it's a source of positive, where it's an open book test. You know what the rules are and you know how to follow them. And that positive event that is something entirely in your control can seep out and seep into other areas, whether that's designing and executing a scientific experiment, identifying a partner that's on the strategic side, and or equity fundraising. This anchor of an audit and accounting system is an asset, and we highly recommend you leverage it as such. The other thing that's threaded through that I didn't call out that I wanted to mention here is on strategic move number 2 is that one of the really interesting allowable costs in your current grant is to use those funds to generate data for future grants. Now that has to be in line with the aims of the project, and it has to be in line with the program that you're going forward for. But that, in terms of flexibility, One of the long-term funding strategies that we recommend is always being one step ahead, where you're using your current funding to generate data for your next grant application. That is named in the federal acquisition regulations as an allowable cost, and you can use that money to generate for your next grant. And that's one of the things that, if you didn't know that, it's a big unlock, it's a big benefit. And that's one of the areas of flexibility that exists that deliver really attractive outcomes. So those are the 5 recommended strategic moves. We will distribute these slides as well to everyone, and the recording will be on our very fancy YouTube channel. So one thing I wanted to just touch on is kind of why submit now? And Dan, if we could start that poll number 3 of how important is non-dilutive funding. As we saw earlier on this chart, the year is back half loaded. And about 55% of the money happens in the last 3 months of the year. And over a third of it happens in the last month of the year, right? So what does that mean for you? In particular, what does that mean for you today? It's November 5th as we look out into the future. What that means is that if you submit here, right, the January 5th deadline, you will get an award, if things go well, before fiscal year end, right? We see that before September 30th of 2026. And so January 5th is, as a deadline, is the last window for the most part, call it like 95% of the time. For fiscal 2026, which is going to end in September, January 5th is the last window to submit for this current fiscal year that we're in. Also, typically, because it happens after the holidays and New Year's Eve and other, everyone's tired after the end of the year, especially this year, the January submission cycle has the least amount of competition in it. In general. So it's a good time to submit. Given the shutdown, we see much even more lowered competition due to the shutdown. And so I think the takeaway here is that doing work in the winter means you gain the benefits in the summer. So if we can share the poll results as well from here, Dan, and the question is, how important is winning non-dilutive funding for you? So over half of you said it's mission critical, which to me means survival. A third says it's important and a priority, and less than 10% said there's just possible interest. So I think that there's certainly some selection bias in there because we're on a non-dilutive webinar, but it's not surprising that for most of us, it's very, very important, and for most of it's also mission critical. Supermajority is that it's very important. The takeaway from that is that now is the time to submit. And because there's fear, because people are concerned that there won't be a program in the future, a lot of people are on the sidelines. That is not a risk. That is an opportunity for you. You have a 100% chance of not getting funded if you don't submit. But if you do submit for January 5th, you're going to have a greater chance than ever because of the supply and demand equation. Fewer people are going to go after it. And the appropriate question then is, will there be something to submit to on January 5th? And I think the answer to that is most likely yes. I'm not any better at predicting the future than you are. And it's very difficult to say what's going to happen, especially about the future. But I think the most likely outcome is yes, there's a January 5th deadline. And if, heaven forbid, there is not, then there will most likely be a January 20th deadline. And there will or worst case, an April deadline. That is I will call that a break the glass emergency kind of situation. But you're going to want to be ready for that to happen in January 5th. And because that's the most likely outcome that is happening. So at Grand Engine, we normally have a cutoff that is the third week of October. We've extended that, but it's like this week. If you're interested in working on the project, we need to know, this week, because we need time to deliver quality, and that all stands to reason. So that's really what we wanted to share in terms of content. We're right at 1 o'clock. I've got a couple other slides on Grant Engine. Actually, let me do this one next. So we have some really good tools. I think higher volume of submissions that are quality is the name of the game. So diversify funding sources, and submit high volume of submissions that are higher quality. We've got a very attractive tool that is under Evaluate, which is a way to evaluate any submission. We also support clients that are active clients with equity investor lists. Know the new rules for the payment management system, and we can certainly help you with that, and be mindful of a tighter foreign risk assessment. We have this mantra of find at the top, win, and manage. And this is certainly an area we've got deep experience with in accounting and handling foreign risk assessment. Certainly, we've talked about manage. We do grant accounting as well as general accounting. And here's a quick snapshot of the team. And actually, this is a representation of the team. There's more people that are on the page here that are on the team. So we've got a world-class team, top-notch folks that are ready and interested in supporting you. And you'll see these in the slides when you get them. But why work with an external firm? I think that expertise of knowing where the flexibility points are and being ready for that audit is very useful. We know where those lines are. We don't have, and we know, so we know how to stay within the rules while maximizing flexibility. We don't have a startup cost to do that, which is really attractive. And we are a full service partner. And I think why now is there are new rules by virtue of DOGE. We can offer a free health checkup that we've got 13 quick questions that will include that link to that on our website in the email that we send out. And importantly, why now is that if you're not right and tight, fixing problems later is going to cost you more money than starting them properly. So maybe let's end the webinar with that last poll, Dan, and also ask if anyone has any final questions. So if you could answer that poll questions, if anyone's got any remaining questions, we can take them now as well. I think we had a few going as we went. No worries if there's no additional questions. So we'll share our slides as we go, which has some additional details around where to be and where to go. But I want to thank you for participating, and we're here, and we'll certainly be monitoring the situation as we go, and keep in touch with another webinar following. So thanks everyone for joining, and we will wrap up right now, and best wishes. Please be in touch if you'd like. Thanks.